On the main stage now, we have the first of our panel discussions, each themed around a key net zero area and how design can play a big role in helping to reduce emissions.
Brilliant, thanks Vasant. So within energy, design needs to work at many levels, from design engineering, working with scientists to create low carbon and renewable technology, to user experience design, making it accessible to consumers and workers for better adoption, for example. So I'd love to welcome today the stage Michael Yates, the Sustainability Business Lead from Norwich Business Improvement District. Michael has a background in sustainability with an emphasis on global urban futures, circularity and political consumption. Recently, he has led the Norwich Solar System, a visionary project to see if by using redundant roofs, Norwich could become potentially the UK's largest urban solar farm. That's super exciting. Over to you, Michael, to introduce the panel. Thank you.
That's all right, I'm all mic'd up. I've got mic, it's fine. That's great. It's fantastic to be here in Norwich, my own city, and thank you to the Design Council for coming. So can I please welcome to the stage Marc, Sam, Sophie, and Alex.
Sorry.
So we'll do some quick introductions. So thank you very much. I'm Michael Yates. I'm the Sustainability Lead at Norwich Business Improvement District. And we've been fortunate enough to look at putting solar panels on our empty roofs, which could be a really exciting project, and I think the first of its kind in the UK. Sophie?
Hi everyone, my name's Sophie. I'm a Senior Energy Analyst at Regen. We're a mission-led, not-for-profit, really focusing on the energy systems challenges to help us get to net zero. I'm particularly focused on the challenges around heat decarbonisation. Recently I've been working with Welsh Government on their heat strategy.
Brilliant. Next, Marc.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Marc Powell. I'm the Head of Accessibility and Innovation at the Royal National Institute of Blind People. We support the 2 million people in the UK living with sight loss, and there's over 1 billion people globally living with sight loss. I'm affected by sight loss myself, have been since I was a young lad. Best way to describe it is right now I can't see any of you in the crowd. These lights are making my dark contact lenses go black, so if anybody wants to heckle me, don't pull faces or gesture, just shout at me. That's what everybody else does. Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the subject, accessibility. When accessibility and sustainability come together, it's a really interesting topic, and I work across multiple markets and sectors to raise the bar in the accessibility space to effectively make things better for everybody, because if you get it right for blind people, you tend to get it right for a lot more people as well. So, this is an interesting topic, done a lot in this space previously within different parts that we're going to talk about. But yeah, really pleased to be here, and was going to be here last year and couldn't because of COVID. So it's good to be here today.
Brilliant, thanks. Marc? Oh, sorry, thanks, Marc. Sam, next.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sam Wevers. I'm Head of Software Product at a company called Lunar. We're on a mission to power homes around the world with endless clean energy, and we're doing that 2 ways. One, we're building the hardware to electrify homes, so we're starting with a home battery system to go with solar panels. And we also have a software platform that connects to batteries, EV chargers, heat pumps, all those things, and saves customers money, saves them carbon, and connects all those homes together to create essentially a distributed, neighbourhood-based power plant that can help to manage the grid and decarbonise the grid at scale. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And finally, Alex.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Meagher. I'm the Group Head of Regulation at Octopus Energy. We're a full spectrum energy company. You might know us best as a second biggest retailer in the UK. But we also have a software platform that provides all of that customer service and billing and the kind of grid services and flexibility that are needed to transition to the future energy market. We also have a bunch of investment funds that have renewable capacity across Europe, and we're invested in helping people get electric vehicles and electrify their homes through heat pumps as well, so kind of across that. My day job mostly focuses on the kind of retail energy market and consumer flexibility, where design thinking is really needed.
Brilliant. Right, we'll start then. So today we're talking about energy, in particular the energy crisis. For a bit of context, more than half the world's population live in cities, which also makes the energy crisis both a planetary crisis and an urban crisis. We know that cities contribute about 70% of all consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions. And in Norwich, on average, all the buildings emit about 1 million tonnes of CO2 in Norwich alone, according to Google's Environmental Insights Explorer. So the question I first want to ask is, what do you think is the biggest challenge today facing the energy industry? I think a good place to start would be Alex.
Well, I think very big picture, the challenge is really delivery, in the sense that I expect across even this panel there'd be a lot of consensus about what needs to be done to make the energy transition happen. But a lot of it is already happening, but we're not really getting on and doing it. And that kind of applies at the generation level, where we are behind on getting as much wind and solar capacity in the UK as we can. It happens at the grid connections level, where there's a big queue in, even if you build stuff, it's not connecting to the grid quicker. And then in something that I think is really interesting is on consumer flexibility, which is that, as we know that homes and cars will electrify over the next, we basically think there'll be electricity peak will increase 2.5 times by 2050. And if we don't harness the way that people kind of can change the usage of that energy and change the peaks, then that demand will cost a lot more across the system. And that kind of relates to, I think, some of the wider things we wanted to talk about equity in the system and getting costs down overall. So I think making consumer flexibility known, understood, and happen is a really big challenge.
Would you agree that flexibility is a really big issue for the energy industry today, Sam, especially with your background in looking at kind of virtual power plants?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, essentially, we don't decarbonise the power sector without flexibility, and if we don't decarbonise the power sector, we don't tackle climate change. And I think the thing that's worth bearing in mind, right, is when you look at global emissions, you've got aviation, you've got transport, you've got agriculture, you've got, cement making and all these things. The one area where we've got really good technological solutions is in the power sector, and it's wind and it's solar and it's batteries and it's hydro, where hydro already exists and you're not destroying environments, geothermal. And to me, the biggest challenge that we still have is frankly just skepticism that the technology is ready to step up. And that's reflected in maybe the decisions that consumers make, and that's why one of the big things that we're interested in is how do you design things that bring the user experience that people are used to in the rest of their life into the energy space, so that you have batteries or EV chargers as as widely deployed as dishwashers and fridges, right? That's the scale that we need to get to. So there's a skepticism maybe from customers because the stuff isn't well communicated to them, or it just doesn't, it's not cool, or it's not attractive. Mm. But then all the way up to government and market design, like we talk about design, right? Like the market should be designed in a way that serves the needs of the users, which are us who turn on lights and, turn on the TV. And at the end of the day, the challenge to getting emissions down and getting the power sector greener is really a question of market design, and regulators and big power companies and governments trusting that the technology is actually there and ready to sort of step into the breach. And that's one of the big things that we're trying to do, and Octopus is trying to do as well, is to prove that this stuff is real and it's happening now. And we just, frankly, need to move quicker.
I think that point on consumer decisions is really important. I think, Marc, what kind of do you think in response to the fact that there's an active market of people who might have accessibility issues? Do you think that for them is a big issue for energy?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think, Sam's just touched on it there. I think when all of these solutions are being designed and people aren't buying into them for whatever reason, or people aren't understanding what they're all about, and then there's that extra layer which is widely forgotten. Disabled people, blind people like myself, we want to contribute. We want to be more sustainable. We want to we want to be doing the right things to our homes that, you know, make the world a better place. And I think as these new solutions come to market, those design considerations around accessibility are absolutely critical, because those interfaces, how we interact, whether it's through voice, whether it's through a smartphone, whatever it may be, all of those things need to be considered, and then accessibility is a layer within that. You know, if we think about currently, you know, there's the in-home displays that we have within smart meters. You know, it took a long time to roll out smart meters, of course, but we stepped in when it came to creating an accessible version of that. So you can at this moment in time get a standard display, or you can get an accessible display. But that, you know, that took time. It wasn't considered at the start, and at this moment, we know that so many people just don't even know that these things are available. And at this moment, when we're talking about energy and sustainability, you know, I don't know at this moment whether, you know, what kind of you know, how much my house is costing me, because the provider that I'm with, I can't actually get that display because initially they didn't know what that was. And that's part of the energy condition, that's part of the licensing conditions of the energy company. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that when these new solutions come to market, when we start to get more understood, start to understand exactly what they're all about, considering accessibility within that process is absolutely critical, because otherwise we just won't use them, and therefore we'll be playing catch up constantly.
That's really interesting. I want to hold that thought about the accessibility of energy. And finally, Sophie, what do you think today is the biggest challenge for the energy industry?
I mean, there's lots, and I agree with what everyone else has said in terms of the biggest challenges. But if you're going to really hold me to one, it was actually really nicely set up by Quajo and what Quajo and David were talking about earlier. It is really housing and retrofit. Ultimately, making the changes in our homes that are going to make it compatible with a net zero energy system. And actually delivering that is really the challenge now. So when Regen started, the company that I work for, we were really focusing on generating more clean energy, helping the renewable energy sector grow. And then increasingly, we were working with the energy networks, making sure that we can transport the energy to where it needs to go, making sure that we can reliably operate that new renewable energy system. We talked about flexibility. That's a key component of that. And the biggest thing right now in the renewable energy sector is making sure that we can connect quickly. Grid is completely constrained because of the regulatory system. And so even though we've made really amazing strides, we've absolutely slashed the carbon emissions from power, we're in a bit of a chokehold right now. But I'm also really confident that we've made that the cogs are starting to turn on this issue. Ofgem has really been paying close attention to it over the summer, so I do think watch this space, changes are coming, and hopefully all that's going to start unblocking. So coming back to the big issue, making the power clean, cool, getting there, delivering it to the doors, kind of getting there, but ultimately making the changes in our homes to make sure that the heat is electrified so we can actually use that clean energy. That's the really, really big challenge right now. And actually delivering that work, because it's really, really nitty-gritty. It's not big wind farms. It's going into every single home, designing it well with quality, making sure it works for longevity. And yeah, that's got to be done for pretty much every single home across the country. So it's like a massive scale of work that we've got incoming. So it's exciting as well, but yeah, definitely I'd put that as my biggest challenge.
I think something that's come through every single response there was about the importance of design. I think it'll be mentioned a lot over the 2 days, but you know, if you're not designing for planet, what planet are you on? And it talks about, you know, we're looking at the impact of both physical design in terms of retrofitting and what can be done, as well as network design. And I think that often gets omitted quite a lot in these kind of discussions. So we had that thought about accessibility. Let's return to that. The next question that I really want to kind of get into is how can we make energy equitable for all? We're talking about it from an accessibility perspective and a social justice perspective. How can we make sure that every single house in Britain and the world has access to clean, green energy? And I think for this first one, I'll come back to Marc.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the sort of angle I touched on earlier. I think if I go back a couple of years, when myself and my partner, who's also blind, when we bought our first home, it was at that moment where it was the first time I was able to access a heating display. I'd never done that in my life. I was 30 years of age, and I'd never been able to control my heating independently. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? Now, I had the ability to put a smart thermostat into my home, and therefore I was able to control my heating for the very first time using Google or my phone, which is great, right? So that said, when we start to think about the solutions of the future, that layer of accessibility, I was here last year, as a prime example, I spoke online, even though I was a bit croaky and had COVID, but I spoke about the accessibility of packaging and how we as blind people want to be more sustainable, but therefore we didn't know whether certain packaging was accessible, or was recyclable or not. So therefore we'd done and made interventions in that space to bring that to the attention. And within this space, digitally, technology is a huge enabler for everybody and for blind people, totally. And within these interfaces that we start to design, core WCAG, web accessibility guidelines, considering all of these different things within these spaces, whether energy companies, how they're communicating, are they communicating in an accessible way? There's so many different factors and considerations here, but they are the simple accessibility 101 that we need to think about when we're designing products, services, environments from the outset. And taking all that aside, simple communication as well. You scale it all back to communication with an energy provider. If they're not aware, if that person on the end of the phone isn't aware that somebody with a disability is talking to them and what the requirements of that person may be, mine or somebody else's experience could just be completely shot down. So there's lots of different factors in this space, but a core part of that is understanding your audience and what it is you're trying to design and who you're designing it for.
I think, kind of reflecting on what you've just said, the fact that you've got large groups of communities who might not have been recognised in the past or is naturally visible, there's often a need which goes unrecognised. And I think that kind of need, looking at equability as well, how decentralised energy can work for all groups is really important to consider. And the idea of decentralisation is a great one in terms of making it accessible. I was wondering, Sam, what do you think we could do to kind of make decentralised energy a bit more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. I think Marc's point around communication is really important. We were saying before on the steps before we came down for the panel, how bizarre it is that everybody has this thing that is literally powering their life, and we don't really know what it's about because it's this sort of thing. And I don't know how my credit card work or when I send money to somebody on my Monzo app, like what connects what and all that kind of stuff. But there's actually a really complicated and really interesting thing out there that is the energy system. But if you just get a bill and your bill is all of a sudden more expensive than it was last month, and you don't know like why, it's very disempowering to not have that understanding so that you can engage with it. And so I'd really echo the point around communication. That's one of the things we're really focused on is in the way that customers use our product, talking to them where they are and not just throwing graphs and numbers at them, but telling them why the thing that is happening is good for their house and why it's better than it was yesterday and what to look forward to tomorrow, so that they can start to connect these things to their daily life and their lived experience. Fundamentally, if we're going to get this stuff to be out there more in literally millions and millions of homes, it needs to be, and this is to the point that Alex made, it needs to be faster to get into people's homes. It needs to be easier. It needs to be cheaper. If it's difficult and it's expensive for somebody who's on a high salary to get the stuff into their house, then it's not going to be something that the masses can take up. And we need to get to a point where local authorities have the options available to put these things into homes when they're making decisions. And for that to happen, again, it goes back to market design. You need to be able to be in a world where if you charge your EV in a slightly different way, or you've got a heat pump and you can turn it on an hour later or an hour earlier, you get a couple of quid for that. Like, that's the world that we should be moving to, and that fundamentally changes the business case. And it's a bit boring talking about the business case here, but if you can bring those numbers down, then all of a sudden, social housing can have these things from the outset, and these homes all of a sudden don't have huge energy bills, and they can actually potentially be revenue positive. It's just a complete mind shift. So yeah, those would be a couple of points for me.
Great. Is there anyone to add on to that?
I think there's so many things going through my head, but I think there's a lot of things around what Sam was saying that do come back to market design. And I think the question we often think about is how do you pay customers fairly for the value that they bring to the system? And I think if we're thinking about accessibility, having a more equitable system, a fairer system, in an energy supply, we always think about having a cheaper system. That will be you need to spend less money overall, and a lot of that is in the market, but a lot of it is in market design and price signals coming through that and regulation, as kind of Sophie said as well. But it's also about then getting it into organisations like Octopus, organisations like Lunar Energy that can really think about what does the customer need and want, and put that at the centre and focus on the communications. I'm thinking about some of the things we've done. What's interesting is it's always, the answer is never just you have to do this one thing. It's you have to do lots of things. And thinking about more. If we think about a couple of things we've done to just even communicate complex bills to people, they range from basic things like we don't have a no reply at Octopus Energy email address. Every email that you get, you can respond to and someone will respond to. So that kind of, you're always opening up a conversation. To, in the COVID crisis, we had a lot of door-to-door salespeople that would go round to people's homes. They obviously stopped doing that in COVID, and we over time, converted those roles, particularly over the energy crisis, into energy helpers. So they would go around to people's homes and say, hey, here are some things that you could do in your home that will make it more energy efficient. And some of them, we know that some of those things are big scale and you can't do them overnight, but there's lots you can do. There was a big campaign winter before last about kind of setting the boiler flow temperature and how that can make your bills more efficient. And I think it was really interesting because usually, particularly at conferences like this, we talk a lot about technological intervention, design interventions, communication, but we've got to remember that you want to do all that and you need that to scale, but also kind of being in people's homes or trying different ways of communicating is really important as well. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here, but it's one of the things that we try to do is have lots of different points of intervention, learn from them all the time, and some things will work for some customers and some will work for others. And if you want to get to scale, that's where you've got to be, really.
I think it's a really good point. And I'm not an Octopus salesman. I'll just throw that out there right now. But I moved to Octopus Energy, and I'd had bad experiences with others. And for exactly what's just been said there, I mean, when you move into your home and you need to give meter readings, myself and my partner just couldn't see them. We just couldn't do that, and it was really, really stressful. Having to remember every month. But instantly, when I spoke to somebody at Octopus, it was just well, don't worry, we'll send someone around to the house. and they'll do it for you. And or, you know, for exactly the ways that bills were communicated, or the app, you know, the Octopus app was really accessible, you know, so it made that completely stress-free. So all of those different things from the consumer perspective are, you know, really, really important.
I'm on Octopus as well.
Sophie?
Me too.
Are you? They're just great, aren't they?
I assume you're on Octopus.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 from 4.
You've got the panel. Well done. Congratulations.
Easy.
But I think that does go to show the importance of design, because obviously, you know, the anecdotal evidence there is that you've done something right. So congratulations. But it also tells us the importance of people power. Coming back to power, the stuff that we heard earlier today, Rose is talking about, it is people which can drive these things forward. And again, the theme of this event is collaboration. It would be amiss of me not to mention collaboration. So how can we work together? If we want to create energy which is accessible for everyone, which suits everyone's needs, which is obviously a very difficult challenge, could something like community energy work to increase resilience in the grid? You're smiling at me.
Do people know what community energy is? No?
You've just volunteered yourself to answer the question. Congratulations.
Now I have to come up with a definition. It's kind of hard to come up with a full definition, but I think it's best described by a movement of motivated people within their communities to come together and form groups centered around energy issues. Quite often, they are focused on building local generation and the benefits of that generation, the profits from that generation, the reduced bills from that generation being kept locally as well. So the people that see and walk past the generation every day also get the benefits of it, which is not something that generally exists within the energy system today. But I also want to qualify that and I spoke about grid issues earlier. A lot of community energy groups are doing lots of other work, talking to people in their homes about small changes that they can make to installing heat pumps. There's loads of things that community energy groups are doing. So, I mean, they need designers as well. So do look out for local community energy groups in your area and see if you can join one. But your question...
Yeah, which is about what kind of role could it play in building resilience? I think that point of resilience is really key. We talk about climate Armageddon, the crisis itself, the age of crises even. But we can be resilient to these things. We can adapt and we can design it into our systems. So back to the question. What do you think it could do to build resilience in terms of community energy?
I think the community energy has kind of two roles in resilience. There's a local one and then a kind of collective national one. On the local level, the energy crisis has really brought to the front of a lot of people's attention the inherent inequalities in our energy system that were there already. People were already struggling to pay their bills, and it's just made it even more stark. If we truly unlock the power of community energy and really keep those benefits local, bring down the costs of energy through local renewable energy because it is the cheapest form of energy, reduce the energy use of our buildings through efficiency, making them better insulated, also thinking about cooling, etc., etc. If we can do all that, then it will level the playing field. However, and then we're not reliant on those price shocks anymore. But then the second point of resilience, from like a larger perspective, is that decentralized energy is, by nature, if it's decentralized everywhere, it's diversified. And that's really, really important when we're thinking about how to design the energy system of the 21st century. We need to try and when we're taking wind, solar, they have their natural profiles, right? And they work in collaboration with each other if we have loads all across the country so that they're all interacting with different weather patterns. And so it's really important that we have decentralized energy in Scotland, in the southwest, in the southeast. And so across the country, when we connect that all up, we can ensure that we have reliable energy for everyone, even for the communities that don't get that local decentralized energy for whatever reason, because there are some communities that won't be able to participate in that for geographical or other reasons. So That's two things. It's keeping the benefits local, but also helping the whole grid be reliable, so we can continue to have power as we have done in the past. We can plug in and know that the power will be that we can turn the lights on, keep the lights on.
Yeah, I mean that hit all the points, I think, right? So not much more to say, but I think the thing that we didn't talk about before when we were talking about equity, and I think Sophie touched on there, is, you know, in the States, if you've got solar, and we operate in the States and Japan and across multiple countries in Europe, so we get to see lots of different countries trying to tackle this issue, and so that's why I've got such a sort of thing about market design, because we're seeing how all these different companies are trying to skin an apple from slightly different directions. But, you know, they can these homes reduce their consumption in the evening from the grid by, like, you know, 80, 90%, sometimes more, sometimes 100. Sometimes they're pushing back onto the grid and providing the grid with power. Now that's saving them money, but actually at the same time, if you have enough of these devices across, you know, millions of homes, you fundamentally change how much power, you know, as a community, as a region, as a country you're using. And that means that we don't have to turn on the expensive coal or gas or whatever it might be, and those savings do actually flow through to everybody. So I think it's worth making that point, that there isn't a bad solar and battery or EV that can be deployed right now. It's a bit of a bold statement, but, like, even if it's just saving that person money, it's shaving the top off that peak, even just infinitesimally, and it's about getting all those shavings and adding all of them up. And then the other point from a resilience perspective is, yeah, completely agree, is you move from a world where you've got 7 or 8 points of failure, which are a few big power stations, to like an internet of energy that's gone from a rope with a few knots in it to like a fishing net. And if you pull one of those knots out, you still got the rest of the fishing net, and you need to patch up that little bit. So that's just fundamentally more resilient. And in Japan, for instance, we did this thing where if there's a typhoon coming, we charge up people's batteries automatically. And we've done that about 30,000 times, I think, so that when the grid goes down, those customers have power. The next level is to get to a system where you microgrid the entire community, so the whole community has power. That's a technological problem that can be solved. It's just about making it happen.
Yeah, so I kind of build on lots of this. There's something Octopus running at the moment called Fan Club, which is if you are an Octopus customer and you're near, there are a couple of onshore wind farms and now actually offshore wind farms, and if they are if the wind is blowing, you get 20% off your bill, and if the wind is blowing a lot, you get 50% off your bill. So it's just a discount on your bill. And it's not quite community energy in like the core definition of community energy, but it's the principle of localized energy, and the electrons have to travel less. You should kind of get rewarded for that. It's an interesting example of rewarding customers for their use and for changing for the system costs that they bring down. It's also something that we've seen change the way they see wind farms and infrastructure, which I think is really interesting, particularly as we know over the last 10 years or so, the kind of debate or not debate about onshore wind and it being banned, and we've seen people kind of change from like NIMBYs to YIMBYs by being able to look out and go, actually I really like the look of that wind farm and I'm getting a discount on my bills. And that shouldn't just be like an Octopus product. Like part of what we do it is because it's like a way of showing that people want, if you give people a price signal, they will change their behaviour, and that will drive change. And I think what's happening in the energy market at the moment is, particularly for an energy supplier, like it's changing from a kind of market of quarterly bills and static meter reads to much more interactive, real-time price signals, and your homes being involved in that. And that kind of step change, history tells us that you can't kind of go out and ask people, what do you want that to look like? They'll kind of, the classic, like they'll say, I want a faster horse. Like you have to kind of get out there and show things to them. Things like what you're talking about in Japan, and then people can see the real benefits of it. And part of Fan Club is like, it's a way of showing that there are in the energy system, there's currently like effectively a national price signal, which means that if there's high electricity demand in the south, that drives like a high GB wholesale price, even if it's really windy in Scotland and you've got all this excess cheap wind. So, and this like costs everyone a lot of money. Like I think in 21, 22, it cost customers, this all comes through our bills, about 800 million for the fact that this wind is blowing. They have to, what's called constrain it, not use it, and then getting into the weeds here, but that effectively that's kind of wasted and paid for and ends up somewhere in pence on your bill. And so so Fan Club is both like, here's a product that should happen, but it's also an exemplar of what could happen across the market if you have more localized pricing, and the way that we show how fairer pricing or kind of equity in the energy market is like often the debate that we get, or the pushback we get often from government is about, well, not everyone can afford an EV, not everyone can afford a heat pump, how's that going to happen? And they are very fair and very important questions. But I think what we're also saying is that if you make these market changes and allow competitive consumer products to come to market, then it's cheaper for everyone, like everyone benefits from smart tariffs. That shouldn't be the only answer. Like we should also be trying to make sure that everyone can benefit from the new technology, but it's kind of a do both scenario.
That's a really good point about localism and how we can be rewarded for the choices that we make, and I think that's fantastic. And let's keep using those wind farms whilst we've got them. Let's keep doing it. I think let's take it back to where we are today in Norwich, and what is a fantastic building, a very low carbon building. But Norwich actually has a really complex morphology which contains a lot of listed buildings. I think it's about 1,500, which make retrofitting things difficult. We can't just put solar on our roofs. How are our communities going to get access or the opportunity to make community energy companies? So what we have been doing is looking at what we can support our businesses with in terms of peer-to-peer energy sharing, using empty roof space for solar panels to potentially make the UK's largest urban solar farm. But to make our fair contribution as part of the Paris Agreement, we have to do more. We can't just settle. And I think it draws back on that point of action. We need to take that action and the motivation and keep going with it. But we have to then reduce carbon emissions by 12.7% year on year. We're really lucky, really, in Norwich. We've got a great opportunity to redevelop a lot of brownfield sites, which used to be owned by the Coleman factory in terms of East Norwich. We have great potential to create and redesign our urban quarter. But how can we ensure that brownfield developments today suit what we might need in the future? And I kind of want to draw in all the points that we've kind of made. So I look to someone to look at me. I made eye contact with you first, Alex. You've had time to take a breather now.
Yeah. This is like, I think this is super interesting. It's like probably outside the way I often think about my day job.
So the question is, how do you roll out your solar city, as it were?
Yeah, I think it's also looking at things like heat pumps as well. How can we design brownfield sites today that won't just be for today? Again, going back to the conversation about social housing, we don't want these things to fall over in a couple of years' time and think, well, that was a waste of money. So how can we do stuff today to suit our future energy needs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go very nitty-gritty, but I would say make sure that you put in assets that can communicate, like through software, in the right way. So we see that there are a lot of a lot of the assets that were installed early doors, like maybe batteries or solar or whatever, maybe don't have metering, or maybe you can't communicate to the cloud, which means that you don't know what's going on and you can't send instructions down to those devices. And so you end up kind of with an asset that's kind of chuntering away by itself and doing a good job, but then, some new value, pocket emerges in the market because of whatever, and you can't go and grab that. So making sure that you've got a system where all those devices are communicating and stable and, essentially robust to the world changing around them, I think is really, really important.
I mean, you can, it's always hard, like, technology is always changing, and that's great. So 100% future-proofing something is pretty tricky, but...
It's a tricky question.
Yeah, but you can build... there are lots, and I'm sure in this room, people with experience of new build homes where you build in from the beginning, both making them energy efficient, but building in a battery, solar panels, an EV charger, and we have a pilot project where the homes are built with all that kit in. People buy them off the plan, and they are zero bills homes. So you buy the home, and we guarantee you no energy bill for 5 years. That's like at a residential level, but that kind of thing I expect, it happens in other countries as well. You probably know more than me, Sam. But it's the kind of thing that I'd expect to happen like more and more. And I'd expect that as we've seen cities and companies kind of moved faster in renewable generation and how they bought energy. Like Google has been a huge innovator in kind of how it buys energy. I won't get into that, but it's just an example of like how often companies and cities moving ahead and saying we will take a kind of zero bills mindset when we're building can be really exemplary, and then eventually that flows through to the mass residential market. Retrofitting is much more difficult, as Sophie said right at the beginning, but designing with this stuff up front is really important, really valuable.
Brilliant. So I think we've got some time for some questions and hopefully some answers.
Do you want to take a couple from the room and then I'll go online?
Yeah, sure. So wave your hand wildly at me, and then someone will come over the mic.
Thank you. That was really super interesting and great moderation, by the way. Going back to the topic of retrofit, I think over 60% of our homes are either owner-occupied or single occupancy. Do you have any exemplars where heat has been decarbonized in homes, not for huge sums of money, but that can be scaled up?
Do you want to take a couple for now?
Thank you. This has been brilliant. I'm really interested in the kind of opportunities that are coming out that are not the way we've done things in the past on a system level, and taking the view of kind of crisis to opportunity and the design mindset of finding the crossovers in all things, from where does good social housing relate to energy security, electric vehicles, vehicle to grid, community energy networks. From that perspective, what excites you most about the energy systems of the future?
Okay, cool. So 2 fantastic questions about examples of decarbonisation and excitement. So should we start? We'll start with the first question about good examples. So having worked in the industry for a long time, Sam, can you think of a good example?
I've not done a bunch on heat, so I don't know if I'm looking at Sophie, seeing how she's reacting to me looking at her. I don't know
she was looking away from me at the time,
right,
so
okay.
actually that should have been the prompt.
I can definitely talk about installing batteries. I'll just make one quick example, which is that when we think about design at Lunar, we're not just thinking about the end user, Mrs. Miggins having a cup of tea looking at something on her phone. We're also actively thinking about the installer. There's going to be an army of electricians out there who are going to have to put this stuff into people's homes. And we've really focused on, in the hardware design, instead of having it as one just monolithic, 200 kilogram, 150 kilogram block, it's a bunch of 45 kilogram like Lego bricks that you can then lift onto the wall much more easily. And the way that everything connects together is just easier. It takes up half the space on the wall that a competitor's product might take up. And what does that mean? It means you can install more in a year. It means that the installation costs come down. You don't have to go back to site because you haven't missed a trick somewhere. That's the real world sort of really kind of nitty gritty, so almost basic stuff that we need to think about. I know Octopus has been looking at that a lot with heat pumps in terms of trying to bring down the cost of heat pumps, and there was an announcement recently. But I don't know what the answer is for. I live in a terrace house in Tooting. I've got no idea how we would put a heat pump in that house. No idea. So I don't know, Sophie, if you can save the world on this one.
So on the terrace housing thing, I think the really exciting kind of business model / technology is utility scale ground source heat pumps. Kenza, who are based in Cornwall, that's what they specialise in. And I'm really excited about the technology, and in terms of scaling up, I think we really need to figure out how to do that, but we haven't really quite got there yet. But the reason it's exciting from that terrace perspective is then you don't have to have these large individual air source heat pumps, and also the heat is it's actually cheaper throughout the year because the ground temperature is more stable than the air. That's a really exciting technology, and Heat the Streets is a project going on in Cornwall, but that's ongoing. They've done some really successful projects decarbonising tower blocks with some boreholes. But it's also really challenging because you have to rip up the street to do it, and nobody likes their street being ripped up, and that's expensive as well, which is why the scalability of it is really important. You can't do it on an individual level, but also I think possibly the missing key to it is integrating it with the rest of low carbon planning. If we're thinking about redoing a street to make it more pedestrian friendly, or bring in more landscaping, then can we also think about drilling some boreholes at the same time, especially in those really tight urban spaces? Yeah, I think I'm just going to shout out Kenza. We'll leave it there so we can ask some more questions if we've got time.
Fantastic. I will ask Marc, what excites you?
Do you know what? I think with all of these things, you know, the way we're starting to think fundamentally about design and the way the future could be, and then when we think about you know, applying accessibility to that and making consumers able to access these things just more easily and more equitably. I can never say that word. You know, if I think about, you know, for example, like for me, when I had to think about designing our home to suit myself and my partner's needs. Both, you know, we're both blind, but we've got one good pair of eyes between us, you know, and so I thought about how can I make this house better for us, and I was fortunate, you know, you know, we've both got a job, but 75% of blind people of working age don't have a job, but we had a job, we had money to do it, and that investment that we made was in smart, you know, was in our smart heating, but also on lighting. You know, our lighting is really important for a lot of blind people, and that of where we can now adapt that lighting, and we can, you know, it will regulate itself to save us money. It will then communicate with us where we've saved money and whatever it may be, and so the developments in that space, I think, is really, really exciting. But also, I think as we start to think about the new solutions that are coming, you know, if we've been typically retrofitting accessibility, and that just breaks things. You know, it's not great design. It's not great for anybody. But if accessibility is on the agenda in the conversations that we've got now, you know, an example of, you know, when the boiler stops working and you need to go and interact with it, but all I can see is a flashing red light and not really know what to do. You know, all of those things, if we're starting to have those questions, answer those questions, we're starting to think about these really simple things that I'm sure lots of people in this audience have looked at a boiler and not known what the hell to do. You know, well, I haven't got the ability to pick up a booklet that's sitting on the top, which is about 20 years old. So, you know, all of these, it's that level of inclusion that excites me. You know, I've learned so much just from chatting with the guys here, you know, just on energy and what's coming down the line, and just on that basic consumer level is what excites me from that inclusion perspective.
Brilliant.
Great, and there's been a late flood of comments online, so I'm just going to ask the two that have been the most upvoted. Sure. So first, Beatrice asked, the dark side of the necessary transition to green energy is the driving of a volt rush in the global south for extracting the materials for powering batteries in the global north. How can we as designers think globally and equally distribute the positive effects of the transition? And then also, Priya cheated a little bit and went on the online platform and got the most upvotes. But she asked, what can we do to improve the language and terminology used in the energy sector so people and customers can better understand the benefits, like taking a cue from the food industry?
Wow, some really hard-hitting questions right at the end. Fantastic. Well, who would like to take the first one on the dark side of sustainability? I think it's a really valid question and really something we all have to consider, actually. You know, what is the global footprint rather than just our individual footprint?
I'm happy to try. So as designers, it is really hard to know what's down the supply chain right now. We live in a globalized society, so that is a challenge. But I think the first step is just looking towards like donut economic principles. So I think that we can all agree that we are going to need a certain level of minerals at a minimum. But there's also things that we can do to reduce this through design, through lifestyle changes that can be really impactful, because if we are driving this revolution and extracting suddenly loads of minerals, that is going to encourage bad practice. So reducing that as much as possible through some of the changes in design is really important. But then I would also say that we just need to work with the countries who are extracting these minerals, because they do have an opportunity there. And I'd recommend checking out the work that the Fair Cobalt Alliance are doing, actually working with the mines, helping them to be safer, making sure that the money is retained by the local community, things like that. So it's twofold in that sense.
That's a really good answer. And then, because I know time is tight, we'll have the other question, which I've just completely forgotten. Apologies.
About how we talk to customers.
There we go. Someone's more attentive than me.
I was working on something about that on the train this morning. I spend probably a couple of hours a week doing copy edits and haggling with other members of my company about whether we should say it A, B, or C ways, because it is so incredibly complicated and confusing and interesting, and there are all these different things that we're trying to get across, and we've got so many pixels. So we're really focused on just telling people the thing that you would tell them if you were around a dinner table, and not just throwing jargon at them. Because ultimately we want them to say to their cousin or to their aunt or whoever, like, oh, I earned like £5 this week because of this thing. And they're like, what? That's the point where we want to get people to. People didn't talk about steps until they counted their steps on their Fitbit, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff out there that is actually really cool, and we just need to find a way to find the balance.
Yeah, energy is really bad at this.
Yeah.
Like, so the things we've been talking about today, chargers, batteries, solar panels on homes, historically the energy market calls those behind the meter, or even worse, BTM assets. I was like, why is it called behind the meter? It's because the meter is in front of the house. And so the house is behind the meter. So everything in the house is a behind the meter asset. And like, just what? Like, it's not accessible language. It's really, so you have to fight against it in the energy market. One example we've done is, so last winter, the National Grid ran a program it called the Demand Flexibility Service, which was where you could turn down your energy at kind of peak times, kind of 6 to 8 p.m. and get paid for it. We loved that service. We helped pioneer it. We didn't call it Demand Flexibility Service. We called it Saving Sessions. So here's a session of time. You can save some money on it. And we gave people Octo points for it, which I think were invented kind of a week before we launched saving sessions, and they were like, oh, let's see how this goes. And Octo points are something, you know, you get a couple of points and you can translate it to something off your bill. Potentially later it might turn into partnerships or something, I don't know. But it's bringing that marketing, commercial mindset. You talked about packaging of food and stuff before. It's bringing all of that to a market which traditionally calls things behind the meter, and uses a lot of acronyms.
Even worse, there was an energy company, a big utility in the US, that I think 2 or 3 years ago started calling the people who pay them for electricity customers. Before then, they just called them meters, like literally. So that like their annual report would say we have 4.2 million meters.
Yeah.
So that's what we're dealing with sometimes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank my fantastic panel. enjoy the rest of the event. I'm sure I will.